That's the ESPN song, right? Okay. Voice sound.
The same settings as last time.
Okay, that's a good thing, right? Okay, so when I'm talking, you're going to be able to hear me talk because these are the octaves that I'm going to be hitting too loud. How loud can I clap, though? That's the question. 1 being golf, 10 being Hiroshima.
Watch that ass, dog.
Take off my pants and jacket.
Waiting for me to fart so you can masturbate to it later.
Goddamn gooch is on fire.
You know what really grinds my gears?
No, shit. Fuck. Cock. Balls. All right, are we ready? On a scale of 1 to 10, how loud can I clap?
Big face.
Okay. Welcome back to our third episode of the Dual Threat Podcast. We'll be discussing Week 2 of the NFL and the impact it left on the landscape of the Gridiron Gala. I'm your host, Sam. I'll be flying solo today as Nor couldn't make it, but we will be bringing on a special guest later, and as always, I am joined by JB behind the glass. Let's start with my initial thoughts on Week 2. Now, a point of contention is that offenses appear to be struggling through 2 weeks, so I decided to do some research. In 2016, through 2 weeks, there were a total of 721 points scored throughout the NFL. This year, there's been a total of 648 total points scored, a difference of 73 points or around 10 touchdowns. But then you have to remember the postponement of the Bucs-Dolphins game Week 1. If you expect a relatively low scoring affair there, say 33 combined points, that leaves us with 40 missing points in 2017 or just under 6 touchdowns. That's 6 touchdowns for 2 weeks, over 31 games, 6 touchdowns missing from 124 quarters. So it would appear that perception is not reality, and this season is just as plentiful in scoring as it was in 2016. So maybe it's the players that are out of place. Maybe highly drafted players aren't producing like they were last season. In last week's podcast, we discussed the top 5 drafted players at quarterback, running back, and tight end and how they fared in Week 1. So let's take a look at those positions through the first 2 weeks of 2016. The top 5 scoring quarterbacks through the first 2 weeks of 2016, 4 of 5 had an average draft position in the top 12 of all quarterbacks. In 2017 through 2 weeks, 2 of the top 5 scoring quarterbacks were drafted in the top 12 at that position. Of the top 5 scoring running backs for the first 2 weeks of 2016, only 1 of these players was drafted within the top 12 running backs. In 2017 through 2 weeks, not a single of the top 5 scoring running backs were drafted within the top 12 of their position. And of the top 5 scoring tight ends through the first 2 weeks of 2016, 1 of the 5 were drafted within the top 12 tight ends. In 2017, 3 of the top 5 scoring tight ends were within the first 12 tight ends off the board in redraft leagues. So in conclusion, it looks like any assumptions that added to the amount of unpredictability in this young 2017 season seems to be influenced by recency bias. 2016 appears to have been just as unpredictable in terms of team and individual success at this point in the season. The top 5 selections at the quarterback, running back, and tight end positions appear to return value at a rate of 40% in 2016 and 33% in 2017. Time is a flat circle. Everything returns from whence it came, and fantasy studs find a way. Take a breath, stay the course, and keep the faith.
And then I dove into the ocean, and I swam with the dolphins. I was 2 animals, joined as one.
Wow. Where do you get your weed?
From you, Dante.
Oh, yeah. What's up, Mr. Teasel?
Now let's dive into news and notes from around the league. Okay, let's start with Greg Olsen, tight end, Carolina Panthers, was placed on injured reserve with a broken foot. Olsen underwent surgery on his broken right foot Tuesday. He's dealing with a Jones fracture. Now, Julio Jones, Marvin Jones, Sammy Watkins, and the NBA's Kevin Durant have all dealt with this Jones fracture in recent years. The Panthers believe that Olsen will return this season. He is eligible to practice after 6 weeks and return to game action after 8. Corey Coleman, wide receiver, Cleveland Browns. Nate Ulrich of the Akron Beacon Journal reports that Corey Coleman is expected to be placed on injured reserve. That would cost the receiver at least 8 weeks with a broken hand. Coleman was able to come back after just 6 weeks from a broken hand last season, but this one requires surgery, perhaps extending the timetable. Rashard Higgins may be worth a look as a fill-in for Coleman, as Higgins played 54 of the 71 offensive snaps for the Browns. That's 12 more than teammate Kenny Britt. Jordy Nelson, wide receiver, Green Bay Packers. ESPN's Adam Schefter reports Jordy Nelson, quad, is 50-50 for Week 3 against the Bengals. Nelson has avoided a serious injury, but it is still possible he's forced to miss a game. The Packers are also dealing with a shoulder injury for Randall Cobb, so the wide receiver core could be in flux for Week 3. Odell Beckham Jr., wide receiver, New York Giants. Beckham caught 4 or 5 targets for 36 yards in the Giants' Week 2 loss to the Lions on Monday night, making his season debut after 4 weeks of rest following a preseason ankle injury. Beckham played just over 61% of the snaps, according to PFF's Nate Jenke. He didn't start, and Beckham appeared to only be getting reps in meaningful situations like third downs and in the red zone. We'll see how his Week 3 status availability shapes out. So those are your news and notes from around the league. Let's move on now to our matchup review from Week 2. All right, let's start with matchup number 1. Let's start with my man of the match, or again, best performing or most clutch performer. Devonta Freeman shined in his Sunday night tilt at home against the Green Bay Packers and opened up the brand new Mercedes-Benz Stadium with a bang as he finished with 19 carries for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as catching both of his targets for 16 yards, finishing with 21 fantasy points. It was an impressive showing from Freeman and a welcome performance to see, as I had 68 total points going into the final game Sunday, and Freeman really put the match away for me. The biggest disappointment? Obviously, the Greg Olsen injury is disappointing, and we currently don't have a timetable for Olsen's return from a broken foot, but as far as the healthy performances go, Amari Cooper had a disappointing 3-point fantasy effort at home against the New York Jets. The game got out of hand late, which curbed Amari's upside, but the true disappointment stems from his target count, especially when compared to fellow wideout Michael Crabtree. Last week, we mentioned that Amari had almost double Crabtree's targets, but this week, Cooper had just 5 total targets. Crabtree only had 6, but 3 of those 6 targets resulted in 3 touchdowns for the 9-year pro, leaving Cooper scrapping for a mere 34 yards receiving. You gotta hope it was the game script that led to Cooper's poor performance, but Amari Cooper's stock is definitely in flux. Overall, it was a poor performance from Michael's team, as not one of his skill players managed to get in the end zone, but it is encouraging that 3 of his players still managed to get over 60 total yards, and that Broncos defense looks ferocious at home during their dismantling of the Cowboys offense. I had a slight misstep sitting Alshon Jeffrey for the quote-unquote starter in Arizona's backfield, Kerwin Williams, but luckily that poor roster management decision didn't cost me in the end. Alshon appears to remain a strong wide receiver 2 candidate moving forward. It is concerning to see the continued struggles of Russell Wilson and Le'Veon Bell. I have more faith in Bell's ability to return it around than I do Wilson, but it was good enough this week as Mike and I both moved to 1-1 on the season. Let's move on to matchup number 2, Kevin versus Slater. Man of the match. Emmanuel Sanders really lit up an injury-ravaged Dallas defense as he finished the game with 6 catches for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns on 8 targets. It was a poor scoring performance from Slater's team, but Sanders really slammed the door on the matchup with this 18-point showing. Sanders really benefited from the great game from Trevor Siemian, and this offense has noticeably expanded since last season. Biggest disappointment. In the same game here, my disappointment is, of course, Ezekiel Elliott's 1-point fantasy performance against the stout Broncos run defense. This was a bit of a surprise, as Denver was typically known for their pass defense in 2016, but they obviously made a concerted effort here to stop Elliott and make Dak Prescott beat them through the air, and unfortunately, Dak wasn't quite up to the task. Elliott finished with just 8 yards on 9 carries and 14 yards on 4 catches. It was a dark day for Slater and Zeke owners everywhere, but some silver lining is that Elliott has 9 catches through 2 games. Elliott finished with just 32 catches during his rookie campaign, so it's encouraging sight to see him at a 4.5 catch per game pace. Overall thoughts on the matchup? It hasn't been a solid 2 weeks for Slater, as he's averaging just under 75 points through week 2. His core is solid, but Terrell Pryor and Tyler Eifert are really letting him down. He has enough talent on this roster to turn it around, but he has to be getting a tad nervous at this point. Kevin continues to dazzle as he's managed to a 2-0 start with arguably one of the worst rosters in the league. This is probably the most impressive start I've seen in Kevin's career. He has had overpowered teams in past seasons, but that really smothered his opponents in an avalanche of fantasy points. But to take this roster that doesn't even have first, second, or maybe even third round redraft talent on it and begin 2-0 is impressive. Say what you want about his opponent's scoring, but 2-0 is 2-0. For our third matchup here, I want to bring in a guest host, a competitor in this matchup, Unfortunately, a loser in this matchup, and that's going to be Tony Theodore Funston.
Sam, thanks for having me. Bobo, it's good to see you two over there. Nice place you got here.
There's no need to fear. Underdog is here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Tony. I know the wound still may be fresh, but sometimes it's best to talk about it and let your feelings flow. So we're going to discuss your matchup here, week 2 against Alex Gomez.
Underdog.
So the man of the match, I mentioned him earlier, but Michael Crabtree really put this one away with his 26-point fantasy performance against the Jets in a Raider home opener. Tony's team did not perform well, but Crabtree left no doubt with his 6-catch, 80-yard, 3-touchdown performance. The biggest disappointment of the match? I'm going with 2 players in this spot with Tony's running backs Jordan Howard and DeMarco Murray. In last week's pod, we said that Tony's wideouts and quarterback would carry the load and the running backs just had to perform slightly above average, but they woefully underperformed this week, scoring a combined 2 fantasy points on 19 total touches. Tony has to be actively avoiding full panic mode as Murray has had 2 poor performances back-to-back, is listed on the injury report, and appears to be taking a backseat to a dynamic-looking Derrick Henry. Jordan Howard also appears to have injured his shoulder in Sunday's matchup against the Bucs, and Tariq Cohen is looking like a bigger difference maker when his hands are on the ball. Now, Tony, I don't know how in tune you were with these games on Sunday as you were working, but what would you say the plan is moving forward with the running back position?
Yeah, so my running backs have sorely underperformed so far this year. My best running back has been C.J. Anderson, who it's hard for me to start with someone like Jordan Howard and DeMarco Murray on my roster. Jordan Howard, I know his shoulder was bugging him after week 1. I kept an eye on him, and he didn't sound like he was going to lose any carries, and he actually still had more carries than Tariq Cohen this week. It's just he couldn't get anything done with the Bears playing behind. I think they had a total of 16 carries throughout the entire game, both of them. With DeMarco Murray, that did scare me when I made the trade was Derrick Henry was going to take away from his production, his time on the field. He's definitely scaring me right now. I think I'm at the point where I might have to sit him down until I could see what's going on over there in Tennessee and start playing C.J. Anderson. I still have LeGarrette Blount, who I'm comfortable with, especially around the goal line. Philly's offense looks like they move the ball pretty well, so I'm not too worried. But DeMarco Murray, he's definitely starting to piss me off.
Midgets piss me off.
Fair enough. Let's say on a 1 to scale, let's put the feelers out there so maybe we can spark some action in this league. 10 being most open to and 1 being completely shut down. Scale of 1 to 10, how open are you to trading for a running back?
I'm very open to it. I'd say I'm about an 8 and 9. I was actually talking trade earlier this week, so you who's listening out there, you know who I'm talking to. So I'm very open to it. I have a lot of pieces to give up. I can give up a first round quality player. Yeah, anybody need a solid first round receiver, second, third round back? Come talk to me. I even got I don't know about Drew Brees, but I got Andrew Luck there if anybody's feeling frisky.
Okay, so speaking of your running backs, C.J. Anderson did not get the start this week, and it ended up costing you the matchup against Gomez. And I'm wondering, what was your thought process on sitting C.J. Anderson at home against the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, I guess I gave the Cowboys a little too much credit. I figured it'd be a closer matchup, and I thought they'd have to throw the ball a lot more. I know C.J. does get his fair share of receptions, but Tampa Bay's got a much better front seven than I gave him credit for as well. So it's just me not doing my research, really. A bad coaching decision, but CJ's definitely stepping it up on my depth chart.
So CJ, a must start going forward?
He's looking that way as of right now, unless DeMarco picks his shit up.
All right, well, we'll see if you are a man of your word on that end. Let's move away from running backs here, and let's talk about Brandon Cooks. Your thoughts on his performance through 2 weeks and his future in the injury-rattled New England Patriots wide receiver corps?
With Cooks, I actually got to see a little bit of that game. I was watching most of it, at least the first 3 quarters, and it just looked like his route running was off. He was getting plenty of targets, and Tom Brady wasn't putting it right in the breadbasket, but it was hitting hands, and I don't know. He just seemed to have a defender over him the whole time. They're not letting him loose like how they did in New Orleans, where he'd just run deep all the time and Drew would hit him deep. But I feel like he's got to work on those intermediate routes because that's what New England likes to do. Once he gets that down, once he starts getting open, I have no worries about him.
Any worry here about him falling into the same trap that other wide receivers in New England's offense have had that come from the outside, specifically Chad Ochocinco or Brandon LaFell, them not being able to gather enough knowledge of the playbook for them to assimilate effectively with Tom Brady?
Well, yeah, it kind of was a thought going into it when he first got traded. I was stoked that he was going to a winning team. He was going to a team that's always going to be competing and does throw the ball a lot. But I was a little worried about that when I heard he got traded. He fit in really well with Drew Brees and being able to run the deep ball and being a speedster. And New England never really takes advantage of that. They are a very underneath the safeties kind of passing offense. And I was excited, but it was in the back of my head that, he might not be as valuable as he was last year. When you say learn the playbook, maybe that's what I'm talking about with his route running. Maybe he is just he's second-guessing his own moves. I don't know.
Okay, well, let's move on to overall thoughts for the matchup. Now, we may have been too quick to anoint Tony with a guaranteed playoff spot. He may have to fight with the rest of us as both of these teams move to 1-1. It's nice to see a surprise victory for Gomez here, but it seems like smoke and mirrors carried Gomez to victory in this situation. How long can he last with the current running back corp that he has? Let's move on to matchup number 4. We have Corey versus Areola. Man of the match. Tom Brady was marvelous in his matchup against the New Orleans Saints, finishing with 30 of 39 for 447 yards and 3 touchdowns. It takes its toll to be on the schedule directly after an embarrassing Patriots loss, and the Saints were on the receiving end of this haymaker from Brady and the Pats. Brady finished with 29 fantasy points and really had a nice bounce-back week from his 10-point performance in Week 1. Biggest disappointment? LaShawn McCoy really let Mike down here, totaling 9 yards on 12 carries and 34 yards on 6 catches, netting 3 total fantasy points. This is the danger of overpaying for fantasy assets, as consistency is hard to come by, and when $65 is allocated to a 3-point performance, it really impacts your team's viability. Overall thoughts? Corey had a great showing with 6 players in double digits, but once again was really carried by the Brady to Gronk connection as they finished with a combined 46 fantasy points. We will see how serious Gronk's groin injury that forced him out of the game in the third quarter is, but Brady looked to be firing on all cylinders. Mike had an overall good showing with 96 total fantasy points, but it wasn't enough to stop him from dropping to 0-2 while Corey moves to 1-1. Final matchup of last week. We have Jason versus Noor. Man of the match. Easily the matchup of the week, as it was a high-scoring affair that ended in a 1-point victory for Noor. My choice for man of the match is Todd Gurley. It appeared he was on his way to another pedestrian yards per touch day, but Gurley exploded in the second half, finishing with 136 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Noor needed every one of Gurley's 21 fantasy points to overcome Jason's 105-point effort. Biggest disappointment? Kirk Cousins continues to play well enough to get Noor and the Redskins a win last Sunday, but with 9 fantasy points, Noor may have to start looking elsewhere for his quarterback fantasy production. The connection with Reed and Pryor just isn't there, and unless some progress can be made, I don't see a lot of touchdown upside for Cousins. Overall thoughts of the matchup? The hype train is real as Noor moves to 2-0 and averaging a league-high 109 points per game in the first 2 weeks. The league rarely has a worst-to-first storyline, but Noor is doing his best to push this narrative as his team appears to be quite consistent. Jason has a good effort here and came within inches of a victory, but alas, he moves to 1-1.
Alas!
Alas! Let's move on to our next segment where we go over the best start and worst starts of the week. My best start of the week? Martavis Bryant had a 1-point performance in Week 1, but Kevin understood the home-road splits that plagued the Steelers, and now Bryant has scored 12 touchdowns in his last 13 home games. It wasn't a close matchup, so Bryant wasn't the difference, but Kevin shows his experience and savvy starting the talented Pittsburgh wideout, and it netted him 15 fantasy points on 3 catches for 91 yards and a touchdown. Bryant may be a headache to start-sit during away games, but rest assured he is a must-start at home, and Kevin made a great choice starting him. Worst start of the week.
You're a fucking idiot.
Apologies for bringing him up again, Tony, but Jordan Howard struggled mightily versus the Bucs, and it could have been expected as the Bucs were well rested, had plenty of time to prepare for the one-dimensional Bears, and were a top 5 rush defense in 2016. Tony elected to start Howard over C.J. Anderson at home against an injury-ravaged Cowboys defense, and it cost him as this move was a net loss, 26 fantasy points. Tony, any last words on this decision? Then we could put it behind us.
It's a curse to have 20/20 hindsight.
Well, it's also a curse to change your name to a shit-talking one before the deal is done.
I'm going to keep doing it, so...
All right, let's move on to a matchup preview section for Week 3. A matchup that I'm looking forward to next week is JB Behind the Glass versus Kevin. Jason opens up as a 26-point favorite over the 2-0 Kevin. It'll be interesting to see if Kevin can keep the magic going, or will his lack of running back talent finally let him down. Meanwhile, it will be interesting to see how Devontae Adams performs with a banged-up Packers receiving corps. Adams struggled in 2015 when he was counted on to carry the load as a number 1 wideout. Okay, I want to slow things down here for a second.
Oh.
Let's dim the lights. Light a candle. Let's walk into the lounge filled with rich mahogany bookcases. Have a seat in the leather armchair. Let me pour you a glass. Sit back, relax, with a new segment we like to call Slater's Slanders. Slater, why don't you let us all know what's on your mind in the world of fantasy football?
All right, thanks, Sam, Nor, JB Behind the Glass. This is the first Slater Slander of the year. Could be my first, and it also could be my last, depending on how well this goes. I was trying to prepare for this. I was debating on how to approach it. Sam and Nor are really just professional, level-headed, and diplomatic about all their views, and I really wanted to take the same approach. But how the hell is Corey 1-1 and I'm 0-2? I mean, I'm just looking at the rosters right now. It's just unbelievable. I'm looking at Corey's roster. Oh, Jacquez Rogers and Thomas Rawls? Yeah, you can go ahead and get 106 points. Oh, Zeke Elliott? Jay Ajayi? No, you can have 50. It's just unreal. I have a new rule proposal next year. It's simple. We're going projected points. It's really simple. All you have to do is you do the same approach. You set your roster. You select your players. You have 97 points projected. Oh, Corey, you have 50. I won by 40. It's really simple. I'm really getting tired of this any given Sunday shit. If you have the best roster, you need to win. Speaking of rosters, Kevin, it's just, it's almost like Kevin saw Corey's roster at the draft, and he says, hold my beer. I'm going to make even a worse roster. And he's 2-0. I knew that this was going to happen. I knew that. I even texted Kevin before all this, before our matchup, and I told him he's going to blow up, and sure enough, he did. But what really sealed it for me was when I see Chris Hulk Hogan running across my screen, getting a pick from what seems like Andrew Bogut, gets a touchdown. I see a flag. Oh, okay, it's coming back. It's obviously a pick play. Well, it seemed Dean Blandino went down into the earpiece of the ref and basically told him, nope, Kevin's playing Slater, pick it up. And, of course, they pick it up. I knew I was done on that. It's just really tough to watch, and even though I knew it was going to happen, it still doesn't take out the sting. I mean, it's just like having, being 8 years old and having a doctor is going to say, oh, you're going to get AIDS at 25. And at 25, 25 comes around, and sure enough, you have full-blown AIDS. It still stings. It still hurts. Now, I mean, obviously, it's not the same getting told you have AIDS and losing to Kevin. That's just ridiculous. Losing to Kevin's roster is much more painful. And moving on, Gomez and Tony, where is this coming from? This little new rivalry. I'm loving this. Let's keep it up, boys. It's good to see someone else besides me and Corey go at it, and even the team names, chokes on dicks, like chokes in the playoffs. Oh man, love it. It's classic Gomez. And it's just week 2, and I know there's not a lot to really go on, and I'm sure there's going to be in the more coming weeks more spares, more injustices, and so I'll be sure to talk about that. But for now, that's pretty much all I have to say about these first 2 weeks, mostly revolving around my team. But I'm hopeful to, in the coming weeks, keep going with this. So again, thank you. I think it's very therapeutic for me to talk about this out in the open, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it next week. Thanks, guys.
Bravo, Slater. Bravo. Great first Slater slander there. Hopefully that will be a reoccurring segment on this show. Appreciate your time and effort. Really delivered in a big spot there. So thanks, Slate.
Really good.
So finally, our last segment of the week, as is tradition, we will be moving on to the weekly power rankings. Number 10. Alex Gomez, 1-1. Though he got his first victory last week, it was not in convincing fashion and really counted on a collapse from Tony in week 2. His team performed poorly again, and his lack of running back talent / depth is really becoming evident as Adrian Peterson got the start again this week. Number 9, Michael Ferralis. 1-1, still boasting a talented roster. Ferralis' low touchdown potential players reared their ugly head in week 2 as he scored a total of 0 touchdowns from his skill position players. Cook, Miller, Allen, Cooper are all yardage studs, but their ability to score on a consistent basis is questionable, and that makes Ferralis' ceiling low. Number 8. Slater slander himself, Alex Slater at 0-2. At some point, his trio of running backs will him to a win, but it hasn't happened yet as they trade weeks of poor performances. Matt Ryan has left a lot to be desired, and off-season acquisition Terrell Pryor has been a huge disappointment. The future is unclear for Slater with a litany of underperforming assets. Number 7, Sam Nix, 1-1. Some of the highly drafted talent came to the forefront this week as Devonta Foreman and Alshon Jeffrey scored 21 and 15 points respectively. It remains to be seen if the Thomases or Russell Wilson can get going, but there is enough talent here to scrape by for the time being. Number 6, Michael Ariola, 0-2. Finding new and creative ways to lose, Mike still sports a talent-laden roster, even when Sean McCoy scores 3 total points. The issue is going to come down to the bye-week gauntlet, as Mike simply doesn't have the depth to survive multiple weeks of his starters on bye. Number 5, Corey Hart, 1-1. As long as Corey has Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, he is able to beat anyone. And the pair of Pats combined for 46 fantasy points, and that was with Gronk exiting the game in the third quarter. The injury isn't presumed to be serious according to ESPN, so as long as these two are on the field, Corey remains a dangerous owner. Kevin Wallen, 2-0. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. The wide receiver core of Martavis Bryant, Chris Hogan, Stephon Diggs, and Emmanuel Sanders may actually be enough to carry his team. If Aaron Rodgers can start playing like the number 1 overall quarterback, I think Kevin may find himself in the playoffs once again. Number 3, Tony Funston, 1-1. I still believe. Last week was a hideous showing, and the talent at running back seems to sparkle a lot less this week than last, but his depth at wide receiver still carries the way here as Odell Beckham Jr. gets healthy. I think he raises the entire ceiling for this roster. Number 2, Jason Bercease, 1-1. A lot of investment in Oakland Raider offense here, with Derek Carr and Marshawn Lynch being key contributors on this roster, but the investment is paying off. Melvin Gordon is quietly having a productive season, and Devontae Adams may move into a starring role in the Green Bay offense. And of course, number 1, Noor Sandhu, 2-0, escaped week 2 with a close victory over Jason, and his trio of young running backs led the way again, scoring 55 combined points. As long as these 3 can stay healthy, there isn't anyone Noor can't beat. And he is averaging 109 fantasy points per week with a struggling Kirk Cousins and AJ Green. So, Tony, obviously a little bit of a slide for yourself, moving from 1 to 3, but you lost the number 10 overall team, and I think that's a gracious spot for you. Any thoughts on your ranking specifically, or anyone's rank in general?
My ranking, I think that's pretty fair. Even in week 1, a roster that has as much talent as mine, I expect to put up at least 95 a week. So week 1 was pretty ordinary, but I'm cursed with week 2. So I understand being number 3 right now, but I look back at it, and throughout the years, week 2, I think I average about 74 points in this league. Who I thought you had ranked a little low was Feralis. I think he's got a pretty solid roster. I like his wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, he's got, I'm not a big fan of Dak Prescott as a fantasy quarterback, but someone like Phillip Rivers, once that offense starts clicking a little more and, Mike Williams gets healthy, Phillip's going to be solid. I love his running backs with Crowell and Dalvin Cook. Even Alvin Kamara could put up some big points. And then his receivers are solid as well. Amari had a bad week, but it's Amari Cooper, and the Raiders are going to score touchdowns. Would you have him ranked at 8?
9.
9, yeah. I think that's a little low for him. I think his team's pretty solid. And he's got the best tight end in fantasy right now in Kobe Fleener.
Well, technically, he does have the best tight end in fantasy with Kobe Fleener, or one of the best at least. I mean, I was going to throw this stat up earlier, but didn't really find the spot for it. I'm glad you threw it to me here, but just an FYI for anybody feeling underappreciated in fantasy football, Kobe Fleener has the same amount of fantasy points through 2 weeks as Tyler Eifert, Jordan Reed, Greg Olson, Jimmy Graham, Martellus Bennett combined. So those 5 studs can't compare to one Kobe Fleener. So you're right, he is talent laden. I just, again, I made my point in my spiel about Feralis is he's got a lot of low touchdown potential players. So he put up a poor performance last week. Maybe I'm suffering from a little recency bias as I just waxed that ass. But I think moving forward, he might experience these weeks more often than not with these roster construction.
It's very possible.
So there you have it. Episode 3 in the books. Week 2 NFL in the books. Flying solo today. Thank you for my temporary co-pilot here, Tony, for stopping by and filling in for Noor. Much appreciated.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well.
Also, thank you for Slater for our first weekly segment of Slater Slanders. Great contributor there. Thank you, JB Behind the Glass, and thank you to all the listeners sticking around and putting up with our shenanigans. We'll see you next week.
It's a lie. There's not really glass here.
Don't tell him that. There's glass. There's glass everywhere. Don't cut yourself on the glass.
It's all a lie.
He's right here.
Now you're
You're JB behind the glass.
living.